I walked into the officers' club expecting my brother to destroy my reputation in front of half the Navy. Instead, I saw a ghost on the stage. The silver ring on the Admiral's hand was supposed to be 6 feet underground, buried with my father 10 years ago. That flash of blue stone didn't just prove I was right about the secrets in his grave, it gave me the weapon to sink everything my family had built on his corpse. My name is Kendall Rhodes, and walking into the Norfolk Officers Club that night felt less like attending a charity gala and more like stepping onto a live firing range without a vest. The invitation had arrived 2 weeks ago on heavy cream cardstock, embossed with the golden anchor of the Navy League, but the subtext was written in invisible ink only a Rhodes could read. This was not a request for my presence. It was a summons to an execution, and my brother, Mason, intended to be the one pulling the trigger. I checked my reflection in the darkened glass of the entryway before pushing through the double oak doors. I was not the same person who had fled this world of rigid hierarchy and suffocating traditions 7 years ago. Tonight, I wore a black suit that had cost more than my first car, tailored so sharply it could cut glass. My hair was pulled back in a severe, calculated knot. There was no jewelry, no softness, nothing for them to latch onto. I was armor from head to toe. I took a breath, tasting the familiar but stale air of old money and floor wax, and stepped into the ballroom. The room was a sea of dress whites and dinner jackets, a kaleidoscope of gold braid and metals shifting under the low, amber light of crystal chandeliers. 500 guests were packed into the hall, a carefully curated mix of active-duty admirals, defense contractors, local politicians, and the wealthy widows who funded them all. The noise was a polite roar, the clinking of silver forks against china and the murmur of deals being struck masked by a string quartet playing something inoffensive in the corner. It was the sound of my childhood, a sound I had spent my entire adult life trying to scrub from my memory. I moved through the crowd with the precision of a shark in familiar waters. Declining the champagne flute offered by a passing waiter, I needed a clear head. My eyes scanned the room, not looking for allies because I knew I had none, but locating the threats. It did not take long to find them. Mason was standing near the raised stage at the front of the room, holding court. Even from 50 feet away, I could see the flush of adrenaline on his cheeks. He looked exactly like the golden boy my parents had manufactured him to be. Tall and broad in his tuxedo, his smile practiced and dazzling, but I knew the cracks in the veneer. I knew the desperation that lived behind his eyes when the quarterly reports didn't add up. In his left hand, he clutched a thick leather portfolio against his chest like a shield. That folder was the weapon. I knew exactly what he thought was inside it. He had spent weeks compiling a dossier of lies and half-truths, a narrative designed to paint me as a mentally unstable failure who had squandered her inheritance on a vaporware startup. He planned to present this narrative tonight, subtly, woven into a speech about family legacy and the tragedy of those who fall by the wayside. He wanted to preemptively discredit me before I could secure the naval logistics contract my company, Harborsite, was currently bidding on. He wanted to bury me professionally in the same room where my father had once commanded absolute respect. I felt a cold, hard knot of anger tighten in my stomach, but I forced my face to remain a blank mask. Mason did not know that the portfolio he was holding was obsolete. He did not know about the USB drive currently burning a hole in my clutch purse, or the sealed envelope tucked behind it. He was bringing a knife to a drone strike. I made my way toward the periphery of the room, finding a vantage point near a marble pillar where I could watch without being immediately accosted. My mother, Elaine, was seated at the center table. Naturally, she was speaking to a senator's wife, her posture rigid, her pearls perfectly aligned. She looked up, her gaze sweeping the room, and for a second, her eyes locked onto mine. There was no warmth, no maternal recognition, just a slight narrowing of the eyelids, a silent warning, "Don't you dare ruin this." I looked away, breaking the connection before she could draw me in. I turned my attention to the stage. The keynote speaker was being introduced, the man of the hour. Admiral Marcus Hale. I knew the name, of course. Everyone in our circle knew Marcus Hale. He was a legend in naval logistics, a four-star admiral who had modernized supply lines in the Pacific, but more importantly, he had been my father's oldest friend. They had served together on the USS Enterprise 30 years ago. Marcus had been the one to hand me the folded flag at my father's funeral. He had looked me in the eye that day, his face gray with grief, and told me my father was the finest man he had ever known. I watched as the Admiral stepped up to the podium. He was older now, his hair completely silver, his face etched with the deep lines of command and the burden of secrets. He moved with a heaviness that had not been there 10 years ago. The room fell silent as he adjusted the microphone. I was about to look back at Mason, to gauge his reaction to the Admiral, when something caught the light. Admiral Hale raised his right hand to adjust his glasses. A beam from the overhead spotlight hit his hand, and a flash of blue fire cut through the dim room. My breath hitched in my throat. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the noise of the room fading into a dull, underwater hum. On the ring finger of the Admiral's right hand sat a heavy silver ring. It was not a standard Naval Academy ring. It was a custom piece, oversized and battered, set with a large, square-cut lapis lazuli stone. I took an involuntary step forward, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I knew that ring. I knew it better than I knew the back of my own hand. I knew the way the silver was worn smooth on the bottom of the band. I knew the tiny, jagged chip in the upper left corner of the blue stone, a mark made when my father had slammed his hand against a bulkhead during a storm in the Atlantic, when I was 7 years old. I had spent hours twisting that ring on his finger while sitting on his lap as he explained navigation charts to me. It was his talisman. He never took it off. He had told me once, in that deep, rumbling voice of his, that the ring was his compass, that it would always guide him home. But that was impossible. I closed my eyes for a second, telling myself I was projecting, that the stress and the lights were playing tricks on me. But when I opened them, the ring was still there. My mind flashed back to the funeral. 10 years ago, it was a gray, sleeting day in Maine. The wind was whipping off the ocean, stinging our faces. I remembered the open casket viewing, just for the immediate family, an hour before the service. My father had looked small in the coffin, his face waxy and unfamiliar in death, but his hands were folded over his chest, clad in white dress gloves. I remembered asking the funeral director if I could have the ring. I wanted it desperately. It was the only thing of his that felt real to me. My mother had gripped my shoulder, her fingers digging into my flesh. "It stays with him, Kendall," she had hissed. "It is tradition. He wants to be buried with it. Do not make a scene." I remembered the priest at the graveside. I remembered his exact words as the casket was lowered into the frozen earth. "He carries his honor and his history with him into the deep." We buried him with that ring. I watched the dirt hit the lid of the coffin. I watched them seal the vault. So how, in the name of God, was it on the finger of Admiral Marcus Hale in a ballroom in Virginia 10 years later? A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. The implications began to fire in my brain like a chain reaction. If the ring was here, it wasn't in the grave. If the ring wasn't in the grave, what else about that day was a lie? Had my mother lied? Had Mason known? I looked across the room at my brother. Mason was still standing by the stage steps, looking at his watch, impatient for his turn to speak. He was oblivious. He was staring at the Admiral, but he wasn't truly seeing him. He saw a prop for his own legitimacy, not a man wearing a ghost on his hand. The Admiral began to speak, his voice gravelly and amplified by the speakers. Distinguished guests, friends, family. I couldn't hear the words. I was moving before I made the conscious decision to do so. I had to get closer. I had to be sure. I pushed past a waiter, ignoring the tray of champagne flutes that wobbled dangerously as I brushed by. I maneuvered through the tables, my eyes fixed on that hand. I stopped 10 feet from the stage, standing in the shadow of a large floral arrangement. From here, the view was undeniable. The light caught the crest engraved on the side of the ring. The distinct, intertwined initials of my father's first ship. Not the Academy crest, it was his. There was zero doubt. At that moment, Admiral Hale paused in his speech. He looked up from his notes. He didn't scan the room aimlessly. His gaze cut through the crowd, bypassing the senators and the wealthy donors, and landed directly on me. It was as if he had been waiting for me to get there. He stopped speaking. The silence stretched out for 2 seconds, then 3. It was long enough for people to start shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Mason frowned, looking up at the Admiral, confused by the delay. The Admiral's eyes were locked on mine. There was no shock in his expression. There was sadness, yes, and a deep, weary resignation, but there was also resolve. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his right hand to his chest, ostensibly to adjust his lapel, but as his hand hovered over his heart, he tapped the face of the blue stone twice with his index finger. It was a signal. It was a confirmation. "I know you see it," he was telling me, "and I am ready." My grip on my clutch tightened until my knuckles turned white. The USB drive inside seemed to pulse with new weight. I had come here tonight to fight a battle over business ethics and family slander. I had come to prove I wasn't a failure, but the battlefield had just shifted beneath my feet. This wasn't about my startup anymore. This wasn't about Mason's jealousy or my mother's cruelty. This was about a crime that had been buried under 6 feet of earth and a decade of silence. I looked at Mason again. He was stepping up to the microphone as the Admiral stepped back, ready to launch his attack on me. He cleared his throat, flashing that charming, shark-like smile at the audience. "Thank you, Admiral Hale," Mason said, his voice booming with false humility. "It is an honor to have you here as we celebrate the legacy of my father, Captain Daniel Rhodes." The irony was so sharp it tasted like blood in my mouth. Mason was invoking the name of the man whose memory he had desecrated. He was building his empire on a foundation that was rotting from the inside out. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I stood perfectly still, my black suit blending into the shadows, watching my brother unknowingly dig his own grave. I touched the envelope in my bag, the one containing the single piece of paper that connected the Admiral to a safe deposit box I wasn't supposed to know about. The Admiral remained on stage, standing just behind Mason. He didn't look at the audience. He was looking at the back of Mason's head with an expression that made my blood run cold. It was the look of an executioner waiting for the command. I took a sip of the sparkling water I had grabbed from a passing tray, the bubbles sharp on my tongue. Let Mason talk. Let him spin his lies. Let him tell the world how disappointing I was. Every word he spoke now was just another shovel of dirt he was throwing over his own head. Because tonight, I did not just see an admiral wearing my father's ring. I saw the death of my father, the entirety of his stolen fortune, and the unraveling of the greatest lie my family had ever constructed around that empty grave, and I was going to burn it all to the ground. To understand why the sight of that ring on Admiral Hale's finger felt like a physical blow to my chest, you have to understand the house I grew up in. It was a sprawling, gray-shingled Victorian in Brunswick, Maine, perched on a granite bluff overlooking the Atlantic. Most families have homes that smell like baking bread or laundry detergent. Our house smelled of brass polish, cold sea air, and the faint, lingering scent of my father's pipe tobacco. It was less of a home and more of a forward operating base for Captain Daniel Rhodes. My father had retired from active duty when I was 6, but he never really left the Navy. He just monetized it. He founded Rhodes Marine Logistics, turning his decades of supply chain experience into a private empire that moved fuel, ammunition, and dry goods for the fleet. He ran the company the same way he ran his household, with absolute discipline and zero tolerance for ambiguity. Growing up, the hierarchy was clear. There was the captain, Dad, there was the executive officer, my mother, Elaine, then there was the heir apparent, my older brother Mason, and finally, there was me, the variable, the anomaly. Mason was the golden boy from the moment he drew breath. He had the Rhodes jawline, the athletic build, and the pliable personality that molded perfectly into military life. Our living room was a shrine to the Navy, filled with glass cases containing model warships and framed photos of Dad shaking hands with presidents. But the mantelpiece was reserved for Mason, his Pee Wee football trophies, his sailing awards, and eventually, the acceptance letter to the Naval Academy in Annapolis. I was different. While Mason was out learning to tie knots and sail sloop boats, I was in the basement, taking apart radios to see how they worked. I was obsessed with systems, with the way data moved from point A to point B. By the time I was 14, I had digitized my father's entire collection of paper nautical charts, writing a clumsy but functional script to overlay weather patterns. I remember showing it to him one evening in his study. The room was dark, lit only by the green glass banker's lamp on his mahogany desk. He looked at my laptop screen, his face unreadable. "It is impressive, Kendall," he had said, his voice low and gravelly, "but you are solving a problem that does not exist. A captain trusts his eyes and his crew, not a screen." He didn't see the future I saw. He only saw the tradition he loved. To him, and especially to my mother. My interest in code and data was a weakness. It was soft. It was an avoidance of the real work of leadership. They wanted a commander, not a calculator. By the time I was 20, the divide was a canyon. Mason was graduating from the academy, looking dashing in his dress whites, seemingly destined for greatness. I was the dropout. I had left a prestigious liberal arts college after 3 semesters because the curriculum felt too slow. I moved into a cramped apartment in Portland, taking freelance coding jobs and trying to build something of my own. To my mother, this was the ultimate betrayal. She called me the troublesome second child, a label she delivered with a sigh of long-suffering martyrdom at dinner parties. I was the backup plan that had failed to launch. But Dad was different. In the last year of his life, something shifted. He started calling me late at night, asking questions about digital security. He asked about blockchain supply chains and encrypted ledgers. He never explained why, but I sensed a hesitation in him, a crack in his ironclad confidence regarding the company Mason was being groomed to take over. One rainy afternoon, about 2 months before he died, he drove up to my apartment. He sat on my second-hand sofa, looking out of place in his cashmere coat. He told me he was proud of my independence. He said that maybe the company needed eyes that saw things differently. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Kendall, when the time comes, I want you to know that I see you. Mason has the face for the brochures, but you have the head for the storm. I am going to make sure things are divided fairly. 50-50. You build the tech. He runs the ships. That is the legacy." That was the only validation I ever got, and it died with him. The call came on a Tuesday morning in November. It was a gray, flat day, the kind where the sky looks like a sheet of dirty metal. I was debugging code for a local fishery when my phone buzzed. It was Mason. "Dad is gone," he said. No preamble, no emotion, just a status report. There had been an accident. My father was on a consulting trip, riding along on a civilian supply vessel contracted by Rhodes Marine for a routine run down the coast. There was an explosion in the engine room, a fuel line rupture, they said. Catastrophic failure. The fire spread too fast. They told us there was very little left to bury. The funeral was a spectacle of state. It was held at the largest cathedral in Portland, filled with rows of navy blue uniforms. The air was thick with incense and hypocrisy. My mother played the grieving widow to perfection, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief while accepting condolences from senators and admirals. Mason stood beside her, stoic and strong, the new patriarch ready to ascend the throne. I stood at the edge of the family pew, feeling like a stranger. I stared at the closed casket, draped in the American flag. I couldn't cry. I felt hollowed out, numb with a grief that had nowhere to go because I wasn't allowed to show it. Weakness was forbidden. Even now. Before the service, we had a private moment in the vestry. The funeral director, a somber man with clammy hands, handed my mother a small bag of personal effects found in the stateroom, which had been far enough from the blast zone to survive partially intact. A watch, a wallet, and the ring. It was a heavy silver signet ring with a square lapis lazuli stone. My father had worn it every day for 40 years. It was part of his hand. He used to tap it against the dinner table when he was making a point. "Can I have it?" I asked. The words rushed out of me before I could stop them. I did not want the stock options or the house. I just wanted the ring. It was the only thing that felt like him. My mother looked at me as if I had asked to dance on the altar. Her eyes were dry and hard. "Absolutely not," she snapped. "It is a naval tradition. Kendall, a captain goes down with his ship, and a commander keeps his insignia. He wanted to be buried with it." I looked at Mason for support. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was adjusting his cufflinks, staring at the wall. "It is what he wrote down." "Kendall," Mason said, his voice flat. "He wanted it on his hand. We have to honor his wishes." I argued. I pleaded. I told them about the conversation in my apartment, about how he had reached out to me. They looked at me with pity, as if I were making up stories to soothe my own guilt for being a disappointment. The priest came in then. He took the ring from my mother's hand. I watched him walk over to the casket. He slid his hand under the flag. I didn't see him put it on my father's finger. The casket was sealed shut, but he came back empty-handed. "It is done," the priest said softly. "It will rest with him forever." I believed them. Why wouldn't I? Who lies about something like that at a funeral? 2 weeks later came the reading of the will. We gathered in the library of the family estate, a room lined with books my father had never read but bought for the aesthetic. The family lawyer, Ryan Thorne, sat behind Dad's desk. Ryan had been Dad's golf buddy for 20 years. He was a man who smiled with his mouth, but never his eyes. He read the document in a monotone drone. I waited for the moment Dad had promised me. I waited for the 50-50. It never came. To my beloved son, Mason, I bequeath the entirety of my controlling interest in Rhodes Marine Logistics, along with the family estate and all maritime assets. The list went on for 10 minutes. Mason got the ships, Mason got the contracts, Mason got the legacy. And to my daughter, Kendall, the lawyer read, pausing to clear his throat, I leave a sum of $50,000 intended to assist in her transition to a more suitable career path. The room went silent. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly, counting away the seconds of my humiliation. $50,000. It was an insult. It was less than what Mason spent on his country club fees in a year. I stood up, my legs shaking. "This is wrong," I said, my voice trembling. "He told me. He came to my apartment. He said he was splitting it. He said he wanted me to build the tech side." My mother didn't even look up from her fingernails. "Oh, Kendall," she sighed. "Stop it. You are embarrassing yourself. Your father was trying to be kind. He knew you were struggling. He probably said what you wanted to hear to make you feel better about your situation." Mason leaned back in the leather chair that was now his, steepling his fingers exactly the way Dad used to. "Kendall, be realistic," he said, adopting a tone of benevolent condescension. "You dropped out of college. You have no stable income. You think Dad was going to hand you half a multi-million-dollar logistics company? You wouldn't know what to do with it. You don't know how to keep money. Kendall," my mother added, delivering the final blow, "you would just waste it on those little computer projects of yours. Money is power, dear, and you are just not built for power." I looked at the lawyer. Ryan Thorne shifted his papers, avoiding my gaze. "The will is valid, Kendall," he said quietly. "It was signed and witnessed 6 months ago." 6 months ago? But Dad had visited me 2 months ago. If he had changed his mind, if he had promised me half the company, why hadn't he updated the will? Or had he? A cold seed of suspicion planted itself in my gut right then. It didn't make sense. The father who sat on my couch and talked about blockchain security was not the man who wrote this will. The man who wanted to bring me into the fold wouldn't have left me with a parting slap in the face. I looked at the three of them, my mother, my brother, and the lawyer. They formed a triangle of solidarity, a fortress. I was the invader. I walked out of that room without taking the check. I packed my car that night and drove south, away from the gray ocean and the cold house. I told myself I didn't care about the money. I told myself I would build something bigger than Rhodes Marine without a cent of their help. But the questions followed me. They haunted me in the quiet hours of the night. Why did Dad die on a routine inspection? Why was the casket closed so quickly? Why were they so adamant about burying the ring? That ring, it became the symbol of everything I had lost. It was the one piece of him that felt true, the one thing that proved he was a human being and not just a uniform. The thought of it rotting in the dark, 6 feet under the frozen Maine ground, made me physically ill. For 10 years, I lived with that image. I built my life around the rejection that started in that library. I became hard. I became successful. I became the person my father saw in me, even if my family refused to acknowledge it. But in the back of my mind, the doubt never went away. It festered. I wondered if I was crazy. I wondered if my mother was right, and I was just creating conspiracies to cope with being the unloved child. That was until tonight. Standing in the ballroom of the officers' club, watching Admiral Hale raise his glass, the doubt evaporated. The seed of suspicion that had been planted 10 years ago exploded into a terrifying, clarifying truth. The ring wasn't in the ground. And if the ring wasn't in the ground, then the priest had lied. My mother had lied. Mason had lied. The grief I had carried for a decade, the heavy, suffocating weight of being the disappointment who wasn't worth her father's legacy, suddenly shifted. It wasn't grief anymore. It was fuel. My father hadn't rejected me. He had been erased, and the people who erased him were standing right in front of me, holding champagne flutes and smiling for the cameras. I touched the pocket of my blazer, feeling the hard edge of the USB drive. The time for wondering was over. The time for 50-50 was gone. I didn't want half anymore. I was going to take it all. 3 years had passed since the funeral, and the Rhodes family estate had not changed. It was still a fortress of gray stone and old money, sitting high on the bluffs of Maine, immune to the economic tides that washed away lesser families. It was Christmas Eve, and the house was dressed in its holiday armor. 12-foot fir trees stood in the corners of the great hall, draped in white lights and silver ribbons. The air smelled of pine needles, expensive scotch, and the suffocating weight of expectation. I was 27 years old. I was wearing a dress I had bought at a thrift store and tailored myself, hoping no one would notice the fabric wasn't silk. My bank account hovered in the low triple digits, a fact that kept me awake most nights. Staring at the ceiling of my drafty apartment in Portland, I had dropped out of my graduate program in data science 6 months prior, not because I couldn't handle the work, but because the pace was too slow. I was freelancing, scraping together code for logistics startups, building algorithms that could predict shipping delays based on weather patterns and port congestion. It was brilliant work. It was the future. But in this house, it was invisible. The dining room was set for 20. My mother, Elaine, believed that Christmas was not a family holiday, but a networking opportunity. The table was populated by the board members of Rhodes Marine Logistics, a few retired naval officers who still treated my father's memory like a religious artifact, and Ryan Thorne, the family lawyer who knew where all the bodies were buried. At the head of the table, where my father used to sit, was Mason. He looked the part of the young CEO perfectly. His suit was bespoke, his hair was perfectly coiffed, and his smile was as bright and cold as the winter sun. He was telling a story about a recent contract negotiation with a supplier in South Korea, embellishing the details to make himself sound like a master tactician. The guests listened with rapt attention, nodding at the right moments, laughing when he laughed. Above the fireplace, the oil portrait of Captain Daniel Rhodes looked down on us. In the painting, my father stood on the deck of a destroyer, wind in his hair, looking out at a horizon that only he could see. His eyes seemed to follow me, heavy with a judgment I couldn't shake. I kept my head down, pushing a piece of roasted duck around my porcelain plate. I was trying to be small. I was trying to get through the night without incident. I should have known that was impossible. My mother tapped her spoon against her crystal wine glass. The sharp, high-pitched ring cut through the conversation. The room fell silent. "Everyone, if I could have your attention," Elaine said. She stood up, smoothing the front of her emerald green velvet gown. Her face was a mask of benevolent matriarchy, the kind that usually preceded a strategic strike. "We have so much to be thankful for this year," she began, her eyes sweeping the table. "Rhodes Marine has had its most profitable quarter in history, thanks to Mason's visionary leadership." There was a round of polite applause. Mason gave a humble nod, raising his glass to the room. "But family is about more than just business," Elaine continued. "It is about taking care of one another. It is about ensuring that every member of the Rhodes legacy finds their proper place." She turned her gaze toward me. It was a physical weight, pressing me into my chair. "We have all been worried about Kendall. As you know, she has been finding herself, trying different paths. But a Rhodes belongs with the fleet, not drifting at sea." I felt a cold prickle of dread on the back of my neck. I looked at Mason. He was smirking, a tiny, tight expression that vanished as soon as he saw me looking. "So," Elaine announced, clasping her hands together, "Mason and I have made a decision. As a Christmas gift, and as a step toward her future, Kendall will be joining Rhodes Marine Logistics officially starting in January." The table broke into enthusiastic murmurs. "Wonderful. Finally. Good for her." I stared at my mother. "What?" I whispered. Mason cleared his throat. Taking over the narrative, "We created a position for you, Kenny, executive assistant to the CEO. You will be managing my schedule, handling travel logistics, and overseeing office administration. It is a great entry-level role, stable salary, full benefits. You will finally have some structure." Executive assistant. They wanted to turn me into a secretary. I gripped the edge of the table. "I don't want a job. Mason, I have a job." Mason laughed, a short, dismissive sound that was meant to be charming. "Come on, Kendall. Sitting in a coffee shop writing code for peanuts isn't a job. It is a hobby. I am offering you a lifeline here." "I am building a company," I said, my voice rising slightly. "I have 3 clients. I am building a predictive analytics engine for maritime risk. It uses AIS data to optimize routes. It is not a hobby." Elaine sighed, the sound of a mother exhausted by a toddler's tantrum. "Kendall, please, do not do this in front of the guests. We are trying to help you. We know about your financial situation. We know you are 3 months behind on your student loans. We know you do not have health insurance." The shame hit me like a splash of boiling water. She had run a background check on me. She had dug into my finances and was now airing my struggles to a room full of millionaires. "I am handling it," I said, my face burning. "You are drowning," Mason corrected. His voice was smooth, dripping with faux concern. "Look, I get it. You want to be independent. You want to play tech entrepreneur. But let's be real. You are playing video games with shipping data. Real logistics is about ships, fuel, and men. It is about dirty hands and hard decisions. It is not something you can code your way through. I am giving you a chance to learn from the inside, to actually contribute to the family name instead of leeching off it." "Leeching?" I repeated. "I haven't taken a dime from you since the funeral." "And look where that got you," Elaine interjected sharply. "Living in a shoebox, wearing old clothes, looking like a specter at your own family dinner. Mason is being generous. Most brothers wouldn't hire a dropout with no corporate experience." The guests were staring at their plates now. The discomfort in the room was palpable. A retired admiral cleared his throat, reaching for his water glass. But no one spoke up. No one defended me. They were all on the payroll, one way or another. I looked at the portrait of my father again. I wondered what he would say if he were here. Would he let them talk to me like this? Or was this exactly what he wanted? The strong son and the weak daughter? The natural order of things? "I am not taking the job," I said firmly. "My startup is called Harborsite, and in 2 years, the software I am building is going to make your manual dispatch system look like a relic from the 19th century." Mason rolled his eyes. "God, you are delusional. Listen to yourself. Harborside. It sounds like a retirement home for sailors. Kendall, Elaine said, her voice dropping to a dangerous register, I am not asking you, I am telling you, if you do not accept this position, if you walk out that door and refuse your brother's help, I am cutting off the rest of the trust. The trust, the $50,000 my father had supposedly left me, I had never touched it. I had left it sitting in the account as a safety net, a tiny sliver of security against total ruin. You can't do that, I said. That money was left to me by Dad. It is administered by the family estate, Elaine said coldly, and the estate has discretion to withhold funds if the beneficiary is engaging in reckless financial behavior. Throwing your life away on a fantasy startup is reckless. I looked at Ryan Thorne. Is that true? Can she just take it? Ryan didn't look at me. He adjusted his glasses, focusing on the centerpiece of holly and ivy. The terms of the trust are quite specific regarding the trustee's powers. Kendall, your mother has broad latitude. It was a setup. It was a trap. They didn't want me to work. They wanted me to submit. They wanted me under their thumb, in their building, fetching coffee for Mason while he played the big man in the big chair. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud break. It was a quiet, definitive severance. This isn't what he wanted, I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and grief. Excuse me? Mason asked. Dad, I said, standing up. My chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. He didn't want this. He told me. He told me he wanted to split the company. He told me he valued what I could do. Oh, here we go, Mason groaned, throwing his napkin on the table. The conspiracy theory again. It is not a theory, I shouted. I looked around the table, meeting the eyes of the strangers who were judging me. He came to see me, 2 months before he died. He said he was rewriting the will. He said Mason had the face, but I had the head. He knew something was wrong with the company, and he wanted me to fix it. Elaine stood up too. Her face was pale with fury. Sit down. Kendall, you are drunk. I am stone sober. Mother, I turned to Ryan Thorne. You know it, don't you? Ryan? You were his friend. You know he wouldn't have left me with nothing. You know that will was a lie. Where's the real one? Did you burn it? Did they pay you to hide it? Ryan's face went slack. For a second, I saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a professional mask of pity. Kendall, your father was a complex man, Ryan said softly. Grief can make us remember things that didn't happen. There is no other will. You are a liar, I spat. That is enough. Elaine slammed her hand on the table. The silverware rattled. You ungrateful, spiteful girl. Your father died leaving us to clean up his mess, and we have done nothing but work to keep this family afloat. And you? You use his death as an excuse for your own mediocrity. You invent stories because you cannot accept the simple truth. He chose Mason. He trusted Mason. He didn't trust you. The words hung in the air like smoke. He didn't trust you. It was the weapon she had always used, the doubt, the feeling that I was fundamentally flawed. But tonight, looking at her twisted, angry face, I didn't feel the usual sting of tears. I felt clarity. I looked at Mason, who was watching the scene with a look of smug satisfaction. He had won. He had humiliated me in front of his court. He had proven he was the alpha. Keep the money, I said. My voice was quiet now, steady. Keep the job. Keep the house. Keep the lies. Kendall, don't be dramatic, Mason said, leaning back in his chair. Sit down and eat your duck. We can discuss your start date in the morning. I am not starting. Mason, I am leaving. I pushed my chair in. I didn't look at my mother. I didn't look at the guests who were pretending to be invisible. I walked toward the double doors of the dining room. If you walk out that door. Kendall, Elaine called out, her voice trembling with rage. You are not a Rhodes anymore. Do not come back when you fail. Do not come crying to us when you are sleeping in your car. I stopped at the threshold. I turned back one last time. I looked at the portrait of my father. I wasn't speaking to them anymore. I was speaking to him. "I won't come back," I said. "Not until I own this place." I walked out into the hallway. I grabbed my coat from the rack. I could hear Mason's voice drifting from the dining room as the heavy oak door swung shut behind me. "Let her go." "Mom," he was saying, loud enough for me to hear, "she will be back in a month. She will be back as soon as she gets hungry." I stepped out into the cold May night. The snow was falling softly, covering the driveway in a pristine white blanket. The wind bit at my face, freezing the few tears that had managed to escape. I got into my rusted sedan and turned the key. The engine sputtered before catching life. As I drove down the long, winding driveway, leaving the lights of the estate behind me in the rearview mirror, I made a promise. I wasn't going to be hungry. I was going to be the shark. I drove south, toward the highway, toward the cheap office space in Baltimore where I would sleep on a folding cot for the next 2 years. I didn't have a trust fund. I didn't have a safety net. I had a laptop, a brain that understood patterns better than people, and a burning, white-hot hatred that would keep me warm through the coldest nights. They thought they had buried me. They didn't realize they were just planting a seed. The snow that had blanketed Maine turned to a cold, gray sleet by the time I crossed the border into Maryland. I drove for 9 hours straight, stopping only for gas, the voice of my brother echoing in my head. "She will be back as soon as she gets hungry." I arrived in Baltimore with $312 in my checking account, a 10-year-old sedan, a high-performance laptop, and a list of 3 contacts in the shipping industry who might, on a good day, remember my name from an internship I did in college. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I couldn't afford an apartment. I couldn't even afford a real office. Instead, I found a co-working space in a converted warehouse in Fells Point, a block from the water. It was called The Current, and it smelled of stale coffee, sawdust, and ozone. I paid for the cheapest membership, a hot desk, which meant I had no permanent space and had to clear my things out every night. The first week, I slept in my car, parked under a highway overpass, waking up every 2 hours to the shudder of trucks overhead. I lived on gas station coffee and protein bars. It was the most terrified and the most free I had ever been. I realized I couldn't survive like that. I needed to be in the building. I needed the Wi-Fi, the heat, and the safety. The building's manager, a gruff older man named Sal, was constantly complaining about their online booking system for conference rooms. It was a buggy, third-party piece of garbage that crashed constantly. On the 5th night, when he was threatening to throw the check-in terminal out the window, I approached him. "I can fix that," I said. He squinted at me. "You? You're the girl who's been living in her car, aren't you?" "I'm a systems architect," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "That system is running on a patched-together framework that isn't built to handle API calls from that many users. Let me rebuild the back end. It will cost you nothing. All I ask is that you forget to check the lounge before you lock up at night." He looked at me for a long time. "You get 1 week," he said, "and I don't want to see you. You're a ghost." That night, I plugged my laptop into the lounge TV and got to work. I spent the next 3 days fueled by vending machine soda, reverse engineering their system and building a clean, lightweight Python script to replace it. By the end of the week, the booking system worked flawlessly. Sal grunted in approval and handed me a key fob. "Just clean up after yourself," he muttered. The lumpy, stained gray sofa in the lounge of The Current became my bed. I showered at a 24-hour gym 2 miles away. I was, as my mother had so acidly predicted, homeless, but I was working. Sal, as it turned out, was the key. He managed the building, which meant he knew everyone. 2 weeks into my residency on his sofa, he introduced me to a man from a small freight brokerage leasing a 2-person office on the 3rd floor. "This is Kendall," Sal said. "She's the one who fixed the system. She does computer stuff." The broker, a stressed-out man named Mike, was skeptical. "Computer stuff? Look, kid, I move refrigerated cargo. My problem isn't computers. My problem is that my dispatcher just routed a $50,000 shipment of shrimp through a port that's about to get shut down by a tropical storm. I'm going to eat the entire load." "How did your dispatcher route it?" I asked. "He looked at the weather report this morning. It said clear. Now it says not clear. What am I supposed to do?" "You're using static weather data," I said, the familiar rush of solving a puzzle overriding my exhaustion. "You're looking at a picture. You need to be looking at a video. You need to integrate real-time AIS tracking data from the ships with predictive meteorological models. You shouldn't be asking, 'Where's the storm now?' You should be asking, 'Where will the storm and my ship be in 72 hours?'" He stared at me. "Can you do that?" "I can build you a dashboard," I said, "for $1,000. It was a fraction of what it was worth, but it was more money than I had ever seen. He agreed. I spent the next week building a tool that pulled data from 3 different public sources, ran it through an algorithm I had been developing in my grad school program, and spat out a simple, color-coded map: green for safe, yellow for caution, red for, "You are about to lose $50,000 of shrimp." He saved the shipment. The next week, he paid me $2,000 to put his whole fleet on the system. He told another small broker. That broker told a small-time distributor. My client list grew. I was no longer the girl on the couch. I was the data wizard in the warehouse who could save you money. I was solving the exact problems Mason had dismissed as video games. He was right that real logistics was about ships, fuel, and men. But he was wrong about the data. The data was the invisible ocean all of it floated on. Rhodes Marine, with its massive overhead and reliance on institutional knowledge, was slow. They made decisions based on what a port captain told them over the phone. I was making decisions based on gigabytes of information processed in milliseconds. After 6 months, I had saved up enough to rent a tiny studio apartment and a real desk, but I still needed help. I was a great coder, but I was building a system that needed to be bulletproof, capable of handling thousands of simultaneous queries. I needed a back-end architect. I found him in the same co-working space, 3 desks down. His name was Eli Turner. He was in his late 40s, with a quiet demeanor and the saddest eyes I had ever seen. He had been a senior back-end engineer at a major defense contractor until a round of layoffs had made him redundant. He was now freelancing for pennies, designing database architecture for dog-walking apps. I showed him my code. He studied it for a solid hour, not saying a word. Finally, he looked up. "This is elegant," he said. "The core algorithm is brilliant. It's also going to crash and burn the second you have more than 10 users. Your data structure is a mess. It's not scalable." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm showing you. I have 5 clients. I want 500. That's a hell of a jump." "I'm not offering you a job, Eli," I said. "I'm offering you a partnership. 50-50. We build this right. We build it to be indestructible." He looked at me. A man twice my age being offered half a company by a 27-year-old with no credentials. "Why 50-50? It's your idea." "Because I can't do it without you," I said. "And because I'm tired of families where the person doing the work doesn't get the credit." He stuck out his hand. "All right, let's build something." We incorporated Harborside Analytics 2 days later. For the first year, neither of us took a salary. We poured every cent from our consulting gigs back into the company. I moved out of my studio apartment and into a 2-bedroom with Eli's sister to save money. My life became a singular, monastic focus. Code, eat, sleep, repeat. I ate so much instant ramen, I think I permanently altered my body's sodium levels. I slept on a folding cot in our tiny windowless office, which was really just a glorified server closet, but every single day, the product got smarter, the algorithm got faster. Our breakthrough came not from a shipping company, but from an insurance firm. We got a 5-minute slot at a local maritime tech meetup. I was terrified, speaking in front of 100 people, but I didn't talk about the code. I talked about the money. "Right now," I said, putting up a slide, Every underwriter in this room is pricing risk based on historical data. You are looking at what happened last year. Our platform analyzes what is happening right now. We can tell you, in real time, the precise risk profile of any vessel in your portfolio, based on its current location, speed, cargo, and the hyperlocal weather patterns around it. We can flag a high-risk maneuver before it becomes an accident. A woman from a major maritime insurance carrier approached me afterward. They signed Harborsite for a 6-figure pilot program to test our real-time risk assessment platform. Suddenly, we were legitimate. We used that money to hire 2 more engineers and move into a real office, one with windows. We signed a contract with the Port of Baltimore to help them analyze port congestion, using our predictive models to optimize docking schedules. I learned to wear the CEO suit, just as I had at the gala. I learned to walk into boardrooms and present our data with the cold, hard confidence my mother always said I lacked. I showed them charts. I showed them graphs. I stopped saying, "I think this will help," and started saying, "This platform will save you $4 million in fuel and demurrage fees in the first year alone. Here is the data to prove it." They listened. I was at one of these presentations, a dry technical briefing for the Port Authority, when my life pivoted again. After the meeting, as I was packing up my laptop, a man approached me. He wasn't one of the port directors. He was wearing a simple, nondescript polo shirt, but he had the unmistakable bearing of a military officer. "That was an impressive brief, Ms. Rhodes," he said. "Thank you," I said, waiting for the inevitable sales pitch. "I'm Commander Jensen," he said, handing me a plain white card. "Naval Logistics Command. I have a hypothetical question. Your system tracks commercial vessels. Could it be adapted to track, and just as importantly, hide the tracks of sensitive military supply vessels?" I froze. This was the world my father had lived in, the world of classified movements and defense contracts. "Theoretically," I said, choosing my words carefully, "the data is the same. It would be a matter of access, security protocols, and building a completely separate air-gap network." "Your system is designed to share information," he said. "We would need a system that does the opposite. We need to know where our assets are, where their assets are, and ensure that the two never overlap in a way that creates a vulnerability. Can you build a platform that is compliant with CMMC Level 3 security standards?" This was the test. This was the moment that separated the startups from the real players. "Yes," I said, without hesitation. "If you can get us the clearance, we can build the architecture." He nodded, a flicker of something, respect, maybe, in his eyes. "Someone will be in touch." That night, I went back to the office. Eli was still there, as he always was. "We have a new problem," I said, tossing the commander's card on his desk. He looked at it and whistled. "This isn't our league. Kendall, this is the big leagues. This is Rhodes Marine territory," I finished. "I know." While Mason had been spending the last few years issuing press releases about the historic contracts he was signing, most of which were just renewals of the deals my father had set up, I had been building the weapon that would make his entire business model obsolete. He was in the business of moving boxes. I was in the business of information. We spent the next 6 months re-architecting our platform for the Department of Defense. It was grueling, expensive work, all done on spec, hoping for a contract that might never come. While Eli and his team handled the code, I handled the bureaucracy. I built Harborsite a clean, untouchable reputation. We were the opposite of the old money, backslapping defense contractors. We were a small, agile data company that delivered on time and under budget. We had no political baggage. We had no legacy. Or so I thought. I would see articles in the local business journal. Mason Rhodes pledges $1 million to Veterans Fund. Rhodes Marine christens newest vessel. He was playing the part of the patriarch perfectly, wrapping himself in my father's uniform and the flag. He was building his house on a hill, making sure everyone could see his generosity, his success. He never once looked down to check the foundation. He never thought to look back at the sister he had exiled. the one who was quietly building a clean, data-driven empire just a few hundred miles south. He was the king of Atlantic logistics, but his kingdom was old iron, old money, and old secrets. Mine was new, mine was clean, and it was about to go to war. The email from my Aunt Marlene arrived at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, breaking a silence that had lasted 3 years. It sat in my inbox like an unexploded ordnance, the subject line reading simply, "Gala invitation. Please read. Kendall." Marlene was my father's younger sister, a woman who had spent her life trying to smooth over the jagged edges of the Rhodes family with polite smiles and handwritten thank you notes. She was the only one who had kept in touch after I left, sending me generic birthday cards with $50 gift checks that I never cashed. I hesitated before clicking it open. The blue light of my monitors reflecting in my glasses. I was in the Harborside office, the hum of the server rack the only sound in the room. The email was polite, desperate, and dripping with my mother's influence. "Dearest Kendall," it began, "I know things have been strained, but there is an event next week that you really must attend. The Navy League is hosting a gala in Norfolk to honor Admiral Marcus Hale upon his retirement. As you know, Marcus was your father's closest friend. Mason is the primary sponsor of the event, and there will be a special memorial dedication for Daniel, along with the announcement of a new scholarship in his name." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, rubbing my temples. A scholarship. Mason was slapping Dad's name on a tax write-off and calling it a legacy. I was about to delete the email and go back to my code when I saw the postscript. It was written in a different tone, less formal, more urgent. P.S. I spoke to Marcus yesterday. When he heard I was reaching out to you, he insisted. He said he needs to see you. He told me, "Tell Kendall there is something about Daniel she needs to hear. Something I should have told her 10 years ago. Please, honey, come for him, if not for us." I froze. Admiral Marcus Hale. I remembered him as a giant of a man who used to lift me up so I could touch the ceiling beams in our living room. He was the one who had handed me the flag at the funeral, his hands trembling in a way that had terrified me at the time. If Marcus Hale wanted to talk to me after a decade of silence, it wasn't to catch up on the weather. My suspicion flared immediately. The timing was too perfect. 2 weeks ago, Harborside had secured a trial contract with the Naval Supply Systems Command. It was a small pilot program, testing our predictive algorithms on a single supply chain route in the Pacific. But to get that contract, we had to beat out 3 other vendors. One of them was a subsidiary of Rhodes Marine Logistics. Mason had lost a government contract to his little sister. He wouldn't take that lying down. He would take it as a declaration of war. I forwarded the email to Eli, who was sitting at his workstation across the room, eating cold pizza and monitoring our network traffic. "Check the sender," I said, "and then check the event." Eli didn't look up. Already on it, the gala is real, high profile, 500 guests, mostly brass and defense contractors, but you have bigger problems than a family reunion. He slid his tablet across the desk toward me. On the screen was a transaction report. "What is this?" I asked. "I have an alert set up for any inquiries into your social security number or credit history that come from outside our standard vetting channels," Eli said, his mouth full of pepperoni. "This morning, a firm called Legacy Intel Group pulled your full credit report, your rental history, and your court records." I frowned. "Who are they?" "They are a high-end private investigation firm based in Manhattan," Eli said. "They specialize in corporate opposition research. Basically, if you want to destroy a CEO's reputation before a merger, you hire these guys to find the skeletons. They are expensive, nasty, and thorough." "Who hired them?" "That is the interesting part," Eli said, tapping the screen to open a second window. "Legacy Intel usually hides their clients, but they got sloppy with a wire transfer confirmation. They received a retainer of $50,000 yesterday. The source account belongs to Rhodes Venture Holdings." I felt a cold smile touch my lips. "Mason?" "He is digging. Kendall," Eli warned. "He is not just looking for financial dirt. I hacked the metadata on the dossier requests they sent to their field agents. Look at the parameters. He highlighted a block of text. Subject: Kendall Rhodes. Focus areas: mental instability, periods of unemployment, substance abuse allegations, debt history, fraudulent business claims, deliverable format, executive summary, suitable for presentation to stakeholders. Stakeholders, I repeated, the word tasting like ash. He wants a presentation. The pieces clicked together with the precision of a well-written script. The invitation from Aunt Marlene wasn't an olive branch, it was a summons to a public execution. Mason knew I had just won the Navy contract. He knew that for a small startup like Harborsite, reputation was everything. We were currently undergoing the final vetting process for our security clearance. If a credible source, say, the brother of the founder, who also happens to be a major defense contractor, were to present evidence that the CEO of Harborsite was mentally unstable and financially reckless, the Navy would pull the contract before the ink was dry. He was planning to ambush me at the gala. He wanted me there so he could point a finger at me in front of the very people I was trying to do business with. He was going to use the memory of our father as the backdrop for my professional assassination. "Don't go," Eli said, reading my face. "It's a trap. Stay here. We'll issue a press release if he tries anything." "If I don't go, he wins by default," I said, standing up and walking to the window. Below us, the Baltimore harbor was dark, the lights of the ships reflecting on the black water. "He will spin my absence as shame. He will tell them I was too unstable to show up, and I need to talk to Admiral Hale. If Marcus has something to tell me, Mason might know about that too. That might be why he's trying to destroy me now." "Kendall, you are walking into a room full of sharks without a cage." "No," I turned back to him. "I am not going in without a cage. I am going in with a harpoon. If Mason is spending $50,000 to investigate me, it means he is scared. It means he is vulnerable." I walked back to the desk and leaned over, resting my hands on the cool metal surface. "Eli, stop looking at me. I want you to look at him. I want you to look at Rhodes Marine." "I have looked at them," Eli shrugged. "They are a private company. Their books are closed." "Mason is arrogant," I said. "He thinks he is untouchable, but I know how he operates. He moves money around to make the quarterly reports look good for the lenders. Look at the charity. The email said he is announcing a scholarship. Look at the Daniel Rhodes Veterans Relief Fund. He launched it 5 years ago." Eli's fingers started flying across his mechanical keyboard. "Charities are public record. Tax filings are online." "Dig deeper," I commanded. "Look for the vendors. Look for the administrative costs. Mason doesn't do anything out of the kindness of his heart. If he is moving money into a charity, it is because he is taking it out somewhere else." For the next 3 hours, the only sound in the office was the clatter of keys and the hum of the HVAC system. I paced the floor, my mind racing. I thought about the ring. I thought about the will. I thought about the way my mother had looked at me that Christmas, like I was a stain on her perfect tablecloth. "Gotcha," Eli whispered. I stopped pacing. "What did you find?" "It is subtle," Eli said, his eyes glued to the screen. "On the surface, the Veterans Relief Fund looks clean. They take in donations, mostly from other defense contractors and gala events. They pay out grants to veterans' hospitals. But look at the operating expenses." Eli pointed to a column of numbers. 40% of the incoming donations are paid out to a company called Atlantic Horizon Consulting for fundraising and management services. That is an insanely high ratio. Most charities run on 10 to 15% overhead. "Who owns Atlantic Horizon Consulting?" "It is a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands," Eli said. "But I traced the IP address used to update their Wix website. It resolves to a server in the basement of the Rhodes Marine headquarters in Brunswick." I felt a surge of adrenaline that was almost dizzying. "He is embezzling," I said softly. "He is using Dad's name to raise money for veterans, and then he is funneling 40% of it back into his own pockets through a shell company." "It looks that way," Eli said. And he is sloppy. He is moving the money in round numbers, 10,000 here, 20,000 there. It is structured to avoid automatic banking flags. But if you line it up with his personal investment transfers, the dates match perfectly. The money leaves the charity, goes to the Caymans, and 3 days later, an identical amount appears in the Rhodes Venture Holdings account, the same account that just paid the private investigators to dig up dirt on you. He is using stolen charity money to pay for my background check. I realized, the irony making me want to laugh and vomit at the same time. He is paying to destroy my reputation with money he stole from crippled soldiers. This was it. This was the leverage. But it wasn't enough to just know it. I needed to prove it, and I needed to survive the night without being destroyed first. "Can you package this?" I asked. "I need a dossier, but not for me, for the Admiral." "I can build a visual map of the transactions," Eli said. "Irrefutable. But Kendall, if you walk in there and throw this in his face, he will sue us into oblivion. He has lawyers who eat startups for breakfast." "I am not going to sue him," I said, my voice hardening. "I am going to let the Navy do it. But first, I need to know what Admiral Hale knows. If Mason is this desperate to discredit me, it is because he knows I'm getting close to something bigger than just money." I looked at the email again. He said he needs to see you. "Book the flight," I told Eli, "and get me a meeting with Legacy Intel." "You want to meet the guys he hired to kill you?" "I want to see what they have," I said. "And I want to see if their loyalty to Mason is stronger than their fear of losing their license. If Mason is paying them with laundered money, they are accessories to wire fraud. I think they might be interested in that information." I walked over to the window and looked at my reflection in the dark glass. I didn't look like the scared girl who had driven away in the snow anymore. I looked tired. Yes, I looked hard, but I looked ready. "Reply to Marlene," I said. "Tell her I will be there. Tell her I'm looking forward to celebrating the family legacy." I turned back to the room, the plan forming in my head like a storm front. Mason wanted a show? Fine. I would give him a show. He wanted to talk about the Rhodes name? We would talk about it. We would talk about every dirty dollar, every lie, and every secret buried in that empty grave. "And Eli," I added, "make sure the transaction map is easy to read. I want the fonts big. I want the arrows red. Mason wanted a presentation for the stakeholders. I think we should give him one." 3 days before the gala in Norfolk, I took the train up to Manhattan. The offices of Legacy Intel Group were located on the 45th floor of a Glass Needle in the financial district, a building that screamed, "We know your secrets." The lobby was all polished marble and silent security guards who checked my ID 3 times before letting me near the elevators. I was not there to surrender. I was there to negotiate the terms of my own survival. I had made an appointment under a false name, claiming to be a potential corporate client, but when I walked into the reception area, I dropped the pretense. I told the receptionist I was there to see Noah Briggs, the director, and that I had information regarding a wire fraud investigation involving one of his current retainers. It was a gamble, but ex-federal agents do not like the words wire fraud attached to their firm. 5 minutes later, I was sitting in a corner office with a view of the Hudson River. Noah Briggs sat behind a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single block of obsidian. He was a man in his 50s, wearing a suit that cost more than my car, with eyes that were flat and devoid of empathy. He didn't look like a private investigator. He looked like a shark in a pinstripe suit. "Ms. Rhodes," he said, leaning back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "You have a lot of nerve coming here. You know I have a non-disclosure agreement with my client. I can't talk to you. I shouldn't even be letting you sit in that chair." I didn't blink. I reached into my leather bag and pulled out a single red folder. It contained the visualization Eli had built, the map of the money flowing from the Daniel Rhodes Veterans Relief Fund into the offshore accounts in the Caribbean, and then bouncing back into the account that had paid Legacy Intel's retainer fee. I slid the folder across the obsidian desk. "I know you have an NDA, Mr. Briggs," I said, keeping my voice level. "But I also know that NDAs are void when they involve the commission of a crime, and knowingly accepting funds derived from charity embezzlement makes you an accessory to money laundering. Noah looked at the folder, then at me. He didn't touch it. You are accusing your brother of a federal crime. That is a bold move for someone who, according to the file on my desk, is supposedly unstable and desperate for money. Open it, I said. He hesitated for a second, then flipped the folder open. He spent 2 minutes reading the charts. I watched his eyes track the red arrows. I saw the moment the realization hit him. He was a forensic accountant by trade before he went private. He knew exactly what he was looking at. He saw the structuring, the round numbers, the dates that lined up perfectly with his own invoices. He closed the folder slowly. So, he said, his voice quieter now, Mason is paying me with dirty money. He is paying you with money stolen from veterans, I corrected, and he hired you to destroy the reputation of the only person who can prove it. If you go through with the smear campaign at the gala, and the Navy investigates, this folder goes to the DOJ, and legacy intel goes down with Rhodes Marine. Noah stared out the window at the gray water of the harbor. He was calculating. He wasn't a moral man, but he was a pragmatic one. He had built a reputation as the gold standard in corporate intelligence. Getting indicted for laundering stolen charity funds for a mid-tier defense contractor was not part of his business plan. He turned back to me. What do you want? I want to know what you have, I said. I want to know what Mason is planning to say on Saturday, and I want to know what else you found when you dug into the family archives, because I know you didn't just look at me. You look at everything. That is your brand. Noah sat in silence for a long moment. Then, he reached into a drawer and pulled out 2 thick files. He tossed them onto the desk. You are right, he said. We do look at everything. We have to know if our client is exposing us to liability. Turns out, your brother is a walking liability. He tapped the first file. It was labeled K, Rhodes. Preliminary report. This is you, he said. Mason paid us $50,000 to find dirt. We dug deep. Kendall, we went back to your college transcripts, your landlord disputes, your medical records. He opened the file and spun it around so I could see. And we found nothing, he said. I looked down at the pages. It was a comprehensive summary of my life for the past 7 years. But instead of the failure narrative Mason was peddling, the report painted a picture of relentless competence. It listed Harborsite's contracts with the Port of Baltimore. It included the security assessment from the Naval Supply Systems Command, which gave my software a superior rating. It had interviews with former clients who praised my work ethic. Mason wanted us to spin this, Noah said, a hint of disgust in his voice. He wanted us to frame your freelance years as unemployment and your startup as a shell company for tax evasion. But the data doesn't support it. You are clean. Kendall. In fact, you are cleaner than he is. He pushed the second file toward me. It was labeled M. Rhodes. Irregular transfers, historical. This is what we found when we ran the standard background on the source of funds. Noah said, You were right about the charity, but it is worse than just the Caribbean accounts. I opened the file. The numbers were staggering. Over the last 5 years, nearly $2 million had been siphoned out of the Veterans Relief Fund. It wasn't just going to Mason's investment accounts. It was paying for the upkeep of the estate, for the yacht club fees, for the PR firms that kept him on the under 40 CEOs to watch lists. He is bleeding the company dry, Noah explained. Rhodes Marine lost 3 major contracts last year because their bids were too high. They are inefficient. Mason is using the charity to plug the holes in the balance sheet. It is a Ponzi scheme built on your father's grave. I felt a wave of nausea. I had suspected it, but seeing it in black and white was different. My father had been a hard man, but he had believed in honor. He had believed in the Navy. Mason was using that honor as a piggy bank. But that is not the only thing we found, Noah said. He leaned forward, his expression shifting from professional detachment to genuine curiosity. When we do a deep dive, we request military records. Usually, it is routine. Service history, medals, discharge papers. But because your father died on a consulting mission, There was an active inquiry file attached to his personnel jacket. It was closed 10 years ago. But there were artifacts. He reached into the back of the file and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a photocopy of an old fax, the thermal paper grain visible even in the copy. The timestamp at the top was dated 10 years ago, 2 weeks after my father's funeral. The header read, Department of the Navy, Office of the Inspector General. The subject line was, Custody of Personal Effects, Captain Daniel Rhodes, Ret. I picked up the paper, my hands trembling slightly. Read the body, Noah said. I read, Requesting authority to retain temporary custody of the following item, recovered from personal safe of subject prior to deployment, pending legal clarification of testamentary intent. Below that was a description. Item, silver signet ring, naval crest, inscription, D.R., distinctive marking, chip on upper left quadrant of stone. I stopped breathing. The room seemed to tilt. Signed. Noah pointed to the bottom of the page. The signature was scrawled in black ink, heavy and decisive. Commander Marcus Hale. Below the signature was a handwritten note in the margins, likely added by Hale before he faxed it to the legal department. Item to be held in trust for designated beneficiary pending clarification. Do not release to executor. I looked up at Noah, my mind racing. This fax was dated 2 weeks after the funeral. Wait, I said, my voice barely a whisper. The funeral. The priest said the ring was in the coffin. My mother said he was buried with it. Noah nodded slowly. That is the official story. But paper trails don't lie. This document proves that the ring was never in the coffin. Marcus Hale took it. Or rather, your father gave it to him before he died. Hale filed this request to legally protect himself from having to give it to the executor of the estate. The executor was Mason. So Marcus has had the ring for 10 years, I said, and he explicitly kept it from Mason. Pending clarification. Clarification of what? Noah pulled out one last document. It was a fragment of a deposition transcript from the accident inquiry. Hale told the investigators that Daniel Rhodes had expressed concerns about his estate planning in the weeks before his death. Noah said, he told them that Daniel was considering a significant restructuring of his assets. Hale claimed he was holding the ring as a token of intent related to a secondary document. A secondary document, a second will. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. My father hadn't just changed his mind and failed to write it down. He had written it down, or he had started to, and he had given Marcus the ring as the key, the physical proof of which version of his wishes was the real one. Why didn't Marcus come forward? I asked. Why did he let me think I had been disowned? Why did he let Mason take everything? Noah shrugged. Look at the date on the fax again. The inquiry was closed 3 days later. The ruling was accidental death. The file was sealed. Maybe Hale got pressured. Maybe he didn't have the second document, only the ring. Without the paper, the ring is just jewelry. He couldn't prove anything, so he held on to the one thing he could save. He looked at me, his eyes serious. But now, he is wearing it. You said you saw him wearing it in the photos from the rehearsal dinner? No. I said, I saw him wearing it in my head, but I know he has it. If he is wearing it at the gala, Noah said, that is a statement. A 4-star admiral doesn't wear a dead man's ring by accident. He is signaling something, and if Mason sees it, he will know the game is up. I finished. He will know that Marcus knows about the fraud, or the will, or both. Noah gathered the papers and slid them back into the folder. Then he pushed the entire stack across the desk to me. Take it, he said. I looked at him in surprise. Why? Because I don't like your brother, Noah said simply. And because if this blows up, I want to be the guy who handed you the smoking gun, not the guy holding the shovel. This file proves the financial fraud. It proves the ring exists. It proves you are clean. He stood up and walked to the window. But I can't tell you what the Admiral is planning. I am just a data guy. Hale is a strategist. If he has been sitting on this for 10 years, he is waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Or, He is waiting for you." I stood up, clutching the heavy file to my chest. It felt like a shield. "Thank you, Noah." "Don't thank me," he said without turning around. "Just make sure that when you take Mason down, you do it thoroughly. I don't like unfinished business." I walked out of the Legacy Intel building and into the cold Manhattan afternoon. The city noise was deafening, but my head was clear. The pieces of the puzzle were finally locking together. The ring wasn't just a keepsake, it was a legal marker, item to be held in trust. My father hadn't abandoned me. He had set a trap for Mason, a time bomb with a 10-year fuse, and he had entrusted the trigger to Marcus Hale. But why now? Why wait until the gala? Then it hit me. The statute of limitations. The financial records Noah showed me went back 5 years, but the corporate malfeasance might go back further. Or maybe it was about me. Maybe Marcus was waiting to see if I was strong enough to handle the truth. He had watched me from afar, watched me build Harborsite, watched me survive without the family money. "He asked about you." Marlene had written, "He said there is something you need to hear." I pulled out my phone and dialed Eli. "Did you book the flight?" I asked. "You are on the first bird to Norfolk tomorrow morning," Eli said. "Did you get the dirt?" "I got more than dirt. Eli, I got the map." I hailed a taxi, my hand gripping the door handle tight. "I need you to find out where Admiral Hale is staying before the gala. I am not waiting for the cocktail hour. I need to see him alone." "That might be tough," Eli said. "He will be surrounded by security and handlers. He is the guest of honor." "I don't care," I said. "Find a window, find a gap in his schedule, because I am not walking into that ballroom until I look him in the eye and ask him why he let me think my father hated me for 10 years. "Kendall," Eli's voice was soft, "be careful. If Mason knows Hale has the ring, he might be desperate enough to do something stupid." "Mason is already doing something stupid," I said, watching the skyline blur past the window. "He is inviting the wolf to dinner." I looked down at the folder in my lap. The facts from 10 years ago seemed to glow, pending clarification. The clarification was coming, and it was going to cost Mason everything. The private reading room at the Norfolk Officers Club was steeped in the smell of lemon oil, old leather, and silence. I had bribed the concierge $50 to ensure we would not be disturbed for 20 minutes. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 hours before the gala was set to begin. The winter sun was slanting through the heavy velvet drapes, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I sat in a wingback chair, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles were white. I was staring at the door, waiting for a ghost. When the handle turned, I stopped breathing. Admiral Marcus Hale stepped inside. He was not wearing the full-dress whites I had seen him in on the stage during my vision of the evening to come. He was in his service khakis, a jacket draped over one arm, without the medals and the gold braid. He looked smaller. He looked like a man carrying a weight that had been grinding his spine down for a decade. His hair was silver, cropped close, and his face was etched with deep lines that spoke of too many decisions where lives were the currency. He closed the door softly behind him and turned to look at me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. He studied my face, searching for something in my features. "Kendall," he said finally. His voice was rough, like tires on gravel. "You look exactly like him around the eyes." I stood up. I wanted to be professional. I wanted to be the CEO of Harborsite, the woman who had just uncovered a massive embezzlement scheme, but standing in front of him, I felt like the 13-year-old girl who had watched her father's coffin go into the ground. "You remember me?" I asked. He smiled, a sad, fleeting expression. "I remember holding you on the fantail of the USS Constitution when you were 4 years old. Your father was terrified you were going to wriggle out of my arms and go overboard. You were screaming because you wanted to touch the water. You were always drawn to the deep end, even then." It was a specific, intimate memory. It disarmed me for a split second, confirming that this man was not a stranger. He was family, in the way that only men who serve together become family. But I wasn't here for nostalgia. I looked down at his right hand. He was holding his jacket, but the hand was visible. The ring was there, the silver signet with the square lapis stone. The scratch on the upper left quadrant caught the light from the window. I didn't bury the lead. I pointed right at it. "Why is that on your hand?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "That ring was in the casket. The priest said it was. My mother said it was. I watched them bury him with it. Admiral, so tell me why you are wearing a dead man's ring." Marcus looked down at his hand as if he had forgotten the ring was there. He sighed, a long exhalation that seemed to deflate his entire posture. He walked over to the low mahogany table between us and sat down heavily in the chair opposite mine. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for the ring. He twisted it off his finger, the silver making a faint rasping sound against his skin. He held it for a moment, weighing it, before placing it gently on the table. It made a heavy thud against the wood. "It was never in the casket." "Kendall," he said quietly. "Then where was it?" I demanded, remaining standing. "And why did you lie? Why did you let me believe he took it with him?" "I didn't lie to you. Kendall, I kept a promise." He looked up at me, his eyes hard and clear. "2 weeks before the accident, your father drove down to D.C. to see me. He didn't tell Elaine he was coming. He didn't tell Mason. He showed up at my quarters at midnight, looking like he hadn't slept in days. He was drinking bourbon straight from the bottle, which Daniel never did. He was scared." "Scared of what?" I asked, finally sitting down on the edge of my chair. "Scared of his family," Marcus said. The words hung in the air, toxic and heavy. He told me that he had found discrepancies in the company accounts. Marcus continued. He said Mason was pushing for aggressive expansion, cutting corners on safety checks to maximize profit margins, and he said Elaine was pressuring him to rewrite his will. She wanted him to consolidate the voting shares of Rhodes Marine into a single trust controlled by her and Mason. They told him it was for tax purposes, but Daniel thought it was a coup. I felt a chill run down my spine. This aligned perfectly with the timeline. The meeting in my apartment, the talk about 50-50. He knew. He knew they were coming for him. "He told me he was going to commission a forensic audit of the company," Marcus said, "and he told me he had drafted a new will, a holographic will, handwritten but legally binding, that superseded everything else. In that will, he split the company down the middle, half to Mason, half to you, and he created a separate trust for his personal assets." "Where is it?" I whispered. "Where is the will?" Marcus tapped the table next to the ring. He gave the will to me, along with the ring. He told me that the ring was the token, the key. He wrote a clause in the trust instructions. "The assets held in trust shall only be released to the beneficiary who presents this ring to the trustee." He looked at me intently. He knew that if he died, Elaine and Mason would ransack the house. They would burn any document that threatened their control. But they wouldn't look for the ring if they thought it was buried. So we concocted a plan. If anything happened to him, I was to claim the ring as personal property under a military custody request, that fax you found, and hold it. "But why didn't you come forward when he died?" I asked, the anger rising in my throat. "I was alone. Marcus, they threw me out. They gave me $50,000 and told me I was worthless. I spent 10 years thinking my father didn't trust me. Why didn't you walk into that library and slam the ring on the table?" "Because of the condition," Marcus said. "Condition?" "Daniel knew you were brilliant, Kendall, but he also knew you were young, and he knew you were soft, not weak, but unhardened. He was terrified that if you got 50% of a billion-dollar logistics company at 20 years old, Mason and Elaine would eat you alive. They would manipulate you, sue you, or destroy you before you even knew how to read a balance sheet." Marcus reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded, yellowed envelope. He didn't open it. He just held it. "So he put a timer on it," Marcus said. "The instructions were specific. I was to hold the ring and the will in a safety deposit box for 10 years, or until you proved that you could survive in this water on your own." He looked at me with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "He wanted you to build your own boat before he gave you the ship. he said. If she is really my daughter, she won't take the hush money. She will go out and build something, and when she does, give her the ring. I stared at the envelope. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, hot and sharp. He hadn't rejected me. He had bet on me. He had bet his entire legacy that I would be strong enough to walk away from them. I waited, Marcus said. I watched you from a distance. I saw you sleeping in your car in Baltimore. I almost stepped in then. I almost broke the promise because I couldn't stand to see Daniel's girl living like that. But then you fixed the building system. Then you started Harborside. I watched you land the port contract. And last week, when I saw your name on the shortlist for the Naval Supply Systems contract, I knew. He pushed the ring toward me. You passed the test. Kendall, you built the boat. I reached out and touched the cold silver of the ring. It felt like touching a live wire. The connection was electric. But there is more, isn't there? I asked, looking up at him. You didn't just ask to see me because the 10 years are up. You are wearing this ring to the gala. That is a provocation. Marcus's face darkened. The sadness in his eyes was replaced by a cold, steely anger. Yes, he said, because it wasn't an accident. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. What? I breathed. The explosion on the supply ship, Marcus said. The official report cited a fuel line rupture caused by metal fatigue, but Daniel had called me from the ship 2 hours before the blast. He said the safety valves on the main fuel manifold had been manually disabled. He was going down to the engine room to fix it himself. I felt the blood drain from my face. Manually disabled. I pushed for an investigation. Marcus said, I went to the Judge Advocate General. I went to the FBI. But the ship sank in deep water. The evidence was gone. And Rhodes Marine had friends in high places. Senators who received big campaign donations. Admirals who wanted retirement jobs on their board. The inquiry was shut down in 48 hours. They called it a tragic accident and buried the file. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. I have spent 10 years waiting for a piece of evidence that would stick. I couldn't prove murder, but I can prove fraud, and I can prove that the man running Rhodes Marine is a thief. I reached into my bag and pulled out the dossier Noah Briggs had given me. I placed it on the table next to the ring. You mean this? I asked. Marcus opened the file. He scanned the charts showing the money laundering from the Veterans Relief Fund. He looked at the payments to the private investigators. He looked at the shell companies in the Caribbean. He nodded slowly. This is it. This is the nail in the coffin. He looked at me. I was going to go out there tonight and just wear the ring. I was going to force Mason to look at it and panic. I was going to make him wonder if the ghost was back. But with this, we don't just scare him, we end him. He sat back, crossing his arms. But you need to understand what you're doing. Kendall, if we walk out there tonight and present this, the ring, the will, the stolen money, it is the nuclear option. Mason will go to federal prison. Your mother will likely face indictment for conspiracy, or at least lose every dime she has. The Rhodes Marine name, your father's name, will be destroyed. The company will likely be seized and liquidated. He paused, letting the weight of the consequences settle on my shoulders. You will get your inheritance, he said, but you will inherit ashes. You will be the woman who sent her brother to jail and destroyed her family legacy. Are you ready for that? I looked at the ring. I thought about Mason standing in the dining room, mocking me for being poor. I thought about my mother telling me I wasn't built for power. I thought about the veterans whose medical bills weren't being paid because Mason needed a new yacht. And I thought about my father, alone in that engine room, realizing in his final moments that the people he loved had cut the safety lines. He didn't leave me a legacy of money, I said, my voice hard as stone. He left me a legacy of truth. Mason and Elaine destroyed the Rhodes name the day they decided to trade his life for profit. I picked up the ring. It was heavy, solid, real. I slid it onto the middle finger of my right hand. It was too big, loose, but I curled my fingers around it to keep it in place. They have used his name to steal from the men and women he served with. I said, they don't deserve the protection of his silence anymore. I looked Marcus in the eye. If the truth has to explode, I said, then tonight is the time to light the fuse. Marcus stared at me for a long second, and then, for the first time, he smiled, a real smile. Your father was right, he said. You have the head for the storm. He stood up and buttoned his jacket. He reached for his cap. I have federal agents from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service on standby in the kitchen, he said. I told them I might have evidence of a felony in progress. They are waiting for my signal. What is the signal? I asked. Marcus pointed to the ring on my hand. When they see that, he said, the party is over. He walked to the door and held it open for me. After you, Ms. Rhodes, he said, we have a gala to crash. I walked out of the quiet reading room and into the hallway. The sound of the string quartet tuning up drifted from the ballroom, the clinking of glass, the murmur of the crowd. I touched the ring on my finger one last time. I wasn't Kendall the outcast anymore. I wasn't the failure. I was the reckoning. I left the private reading room with the weight of the Admiral's confession pressing against my ribs. But there was no time to process the emotion. I had 5 hours until the doors opened at the gala. 5 hours to turn a decade of lies into a weapon sharp enough to cut through the Rhodes family armor. Marcus had given me the strategy, but I had to provide the ammunition. Before we parted ways in the lobby, he had gripped my shoulder, his fingers digging into the fabric of my coat. I can get the agents in the room. Kendall, he had said, his voice low. I have a contact at the Naval Criminal Investigative Service and another at the Department of Justice who owe me favors. They will be there as my guests, under the cover of Ministry of Defense attachés. But they cannot move on a hunch. They cannot arrest a prominent defense contractor in the middle of a black tie event unless the evidence is irrefutable and immediate. You give me the paper trail, and I will give you the cavalry. I nodded, my mind already racing through the logistics. I will have it. A full dossier, visual, traceable, and damning. I took a cab back to the hotel where Eli was set up. We had turned the suite into a command center. The curtains were drawn, shutting out the afternoon light, and the room was illuminated by the glow of 3 monitors and a tangle of cables running across the generic hotel carpet. Eli looked up as I walked in. He looked exhausted. An empty coffee cup balanced precariously on the edge of the desk. Did you see the Admiral? He asked. I saw him, I said, throwing my bag onto the bed, and I saw the ring. It is real. Eli, everything we suspected is true, but the stakes just went up. We are not just exposing a liar tonight. We are taking down a criminal enterprise. I sat down next to him, pulling my laptop open. Marcus has federal agents on standby. We need to package the financial data on the charity fraud. It cannot be a spreadsheet. Eli, these are admirals and donors, not accountants. It needs to be a story. 1 page, simple graphics, money in, money out. Eli cracked his knuckles and started typing. I can do that. I will overlay the Rhodes Marine bank logs with the shell company registrations. I will make the arrows red, big and bloody. While Eli worked on the visualization, I started compiling the supporting documents. I pulled the contracts, the wire transfer receipts, and the emails we had scraped from the metadata. As I sifted through the files, a notification popped up on my secure messaging app. It was from a contact I had in the forensic accounting world, a woman named Sarah who specialized in distressed maritime assets. I had asked her to sniff around the market rumors regarding Rhodes Marine. You were right. The message read, the street word is that Mason is liquidity insolvent. He is borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. He missed a dry dock payment on 2 tankers last week. The banks are circling. If he doesn't land a major government contract this quarter, the whole house of cards comes down. I stared at the screen. It made perfect sense. The desperation, the aggression, the theft from the Veterans Fund. Mason wasn't just greedy. He was drowning. He was using the charity money to make the loan payments on the corporate debt, trying to keep the illusion of success alive long enough to secure a bailout. And tonight, he was planning to use the gala to cement his status as the heir apparent, using the Admiral's endorsement to calm the creditors. He is broke. I said to Eli, he is absolutely broke. He is stealing from the veterans just to keep the lights on at the mansion. Eli shook his head, his eyes never leaving the code he was writing. That makes him dangerous. Kendall, a cornered animal bites. Speaking of biting, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Aunt Marlene. Kendall, please be careful. I just overheard Mason talking to Ryan Thorne. They have a legal team on site tonight. They are prepared to serve you with a cease and desist and a defamation suit the moment you step onto the property. They want to gag you before you can say a word to the press. I felt a cold smile touch my lips. Let them try. A cease and desist order was a piece of paper. What I had was a nuclear warhead. I turned to my own tablet. I wasn't just going there to destroy Mason. I was going there to replace him. If I took down Rhodes Marine, there would be a vacuum in the supply chain. The Navy would need a solution. I opened the harbor site demo environment. I spent the next hour refining the interface, loading in the specific logistics data for the Atlantic Fleet. I wanted to be able to hand this tablet to any admiral in the room and show them, in real time, how my software could track their assets better, faster, and cheaper than Mason's entire bloated corporation. I wasn't going to be the dramatic sister screaming about feelings. I was going to be the CEO offering a superior product. At 5 o'clock, an encrypted email arrived from Marcus. Attached is the scan. The subject line read. I opened the PDF. It was a high-resolution scan of a handwritten document on yellow legal paper, dated 10 years ago. My father's handwriting. Sharp, angular, decisive. I, Daniel Rhodes, being of sound mind. I skipped the legal boilerplate and went straight to the addendum at the bottom. There, in black ink, was the paragraph Marcus had told me about. To my daughter. Kendall, I know the world we live in values the uniform over the mind. They will tell you that you do not belong on the bridge because you do not wear the stripes. Prove them wrong. The ring is held in trust for the one who understands that the future of the sea is not in the steel, but in the truth. Whoever knows how to use data and loyalty to protect the mariner, that child keeps the ring. If you are reading this, you have built your own ship. Now, take command of mine. I read the lines 3 times, my vision blurring. Data and loyalty. He had seen me. Even back then, when I was just a college dropout tinkering with computers in the basement. He had seen exactly who I was. He hadn't left the ring to the son who followed orders. He had left it to the daughter who asked questions. I printed the document on heavy bonded paper. I folded it carefully and placed it in a thick linen envelope. I sealed it with wax, pressing my thumb into the warm red pool. This was coming with me. It was the shield I would raise when they tried to call me a liar. Eli spun his chair around. It is done, he said. The dossier is compiled. I have uploaded a copy to a secure, offshore server. I set a dead man's switch. Explain, I said, standing up to stretch my stiff back. If you do not enter a 16-digit code into your phone by midnight tonight, Eli said, his face grim, the server automatically emails the entire packet, the fraud evidence, the bank logs, the embezzlement charts, to the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Inspector General of the Navy. I nodded. Insurance. If Mason had security throw me out, or if he managed to silence me in the room, the truth would still get out. He couldn't stop the signal. Go get dressed, Eli said. It is showtime. I went into the bedroom and closed the door. On the bed lay the outfit I had chosen. It wasn't a gown. I wasn't going there to be decorative. I was going there to work. It was a tuxedo-cut suit in midnight black, tailored to within an inch of its life. Silk lapels, cigarette trousers, and a crisp white shirt buttoned to the throat. It was severe. It was powerful. It was armor. I dressed slowly, checking every detail in the full-length mirror. No loose threads, no wrinkles. I pulled my hair back into a tight, sleek chignon at the nape of my neck. My face was pale, but my eyes were dark and focused. I reached into my jewelry pouch and pulled out the only accessory I planned to wear, a pair of small, simple pearl earrings. My father had given them to me for my high school graduation. Keep your ears open, Kendall, he had told me then. People will tell you who they are if you listen long enough. I put them on. They were a whisper of sentiment in a suit of steel. As I was reaching for my clutch, my phone rang. The caller ID flashed a name I hadn't seen in 3 years. Mother. I stared at the phone. She never called. She had her assistant call. Or she sent emails through the lawyer. For Elaine Rhodes to dial my number herself meant she was worried. I picked up. Kendall, her voice came through the speaker, smooth and cold as polished glass. Marlene tells me you are actually coming tonight. Hello, Mother, I said. I am calling to make sure we understand the ground rules, she said, skipping the pleasantries. Mason has a very important presentation tonight. This event is crucial for the company. We are all under a lot of stress. I said nothing. I let the silence stretch, forcing her to fill it. I expect you to behave, she continued, her tone sharpening. We have arranged a seat for you at table 19. It is in the back, near the terrace doors. You will arrive. You will smile, and you will keep your mouth shut. If you cause a scene, if you do anything to embarrass your brother or tarnish your father's memory, I promise you, Kendall, the legal consequences will be severe. Do not make your father look bad in front of the Navy. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. For years, that voice had made me crumble. It had made me feel small and defective. Now, it just sounded like static. I don't think you need to worry about Dad. Mother, I said, my voice steady. What is that supposed to mean? She snapped. It means, I said, gripping the phone tight, that tonight, Dad is going to see exactly who has been embarrassing him, and it isn't me. I hung up before she could respond. I blocked the number. I didn't need to hear her anymore. I walked out into the main room. Eli was putting on his own jacket. He wasn't coming inside. He was going to be in the van outside, monitoring the network and the dead man's switch, but he looked ready for a fight. You good? He asked. I picked up the sealed envelope containing the will and the USB drive with the financial data. I slid them into my clutch. I am ready, I said. We took a black town car to the club. The rain had started again, streaking the windows with silver tears. The city lights of Norfolk blurred past. I watched the reflection of my own eyes in the glass. I ran through the plan one last time. Walk in, secure the perimeter, wait for the signal. When Marcus exposes the ring, I move. I present the evidence. The agents step in. It sounded simple, but I knew that plans rarely survived first contact with the enemy. Mason would be charming. He would be surrounded by sycophants. He would try to gaslight the room, to paint me as the hysterical, jealous sister. I had to be colder than him. I had to be sharper. The car slowed down as we approached the gates of the officers' club. I could see the line of limousines, the flash of paparazzi cameras, the heavy security presence. This was it, the lion's den. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, biological rhythm that betrayed my calm exterior. Fear was there, certainly, but underneath the fear was something else, a burning, righteous hunger. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for the 13-year-old girl who had been told she was a mistake. I was fighting for the veterans who had been robbed. I was fighting for the captain who had been betrayed by his own first mate. The car stopped. The driver opened the door. The cold, damp air hit my face, smelling of the ocean and exhaust. I stepped out onto the red carpet. I buttoned my jacket. I touched the pearl in my ear. Let's go to work, I whispered to the ghost of my father. And I walked into the light. Walking back into that ballroom felt like stepping onto the stage in the middle of a play where I was the only one who had read the final act. The polite roar of 500 guests hit me. The clinking of silver on china. The warm, amber light glinting off a sea of polished metals and pearl necklaces. My eyes found them instantly. My mother, Elaine, was seated at the head table, table 1, directly in front of the stage. Her posture was ramrod straight, a queen holding court. She saw me walk in, and her eyes, cold as the Maine Ocean in January, swept over my black suit with a flicker of disdain before dismissing me. Mason was standing near the bar, already working the room. He was laughing. one hand gripping the shoulder of a 2-star admiral, the other holding a scotch. He looked like the king of the world, radiating the easy, unearned confidence of a man who had never faced a single consequence. He caught my eye, and his smile widened, but it didn't touch his eyes. It was a baring of teeth, a predator's welcome. I ignored him. I ignored the whispers that started as people recognized me, the black sheep daughter. I let the waiters and the crowd part around me as I made my way to the side of the room. A hand grasped my elbow. I turned, tensing, but it was just my Aunt Marlene. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else. Loyalty. "Kendall," she whispered, pulling me into a quick, dry paper hug. "You look powerful." "Thank you for the invitation, Auntie," I said, my voice low. "I didn't know what they were planning," she rushed on, her grip tightening on my arm. "Not all of it. I spoke to Marcus. He's here, in the VIP lounge. He told me to tell you to just stay calm. He said, 'Tell her to hold steady. The truth needs a firm anchor.'" I squeezed her hand. "He's right. Don't worry. Auntie, you just stay at your table and watch the show." She nodded, looking like she was about to be sick, and melted back into the crowd. Her words confirmed it. The family was not a monolith. There were cracks. I turned from her and walked to the Wall of Honor. It was a new addition for the gala. Framed photos of decorated officers, and in the center, larger than the others, was the official portrait of Captain Daniel Rhodes, the one from the dining room, where he stared out at a long-lost horizon. I stood in front of it for a long moment, tuning out the noise of the room. I placed my right hand, the one that still felt warm from where I had held the ring, on the cool glass over the frame. "If you really believed in honor, Dad," I whispered, so low that only he and I could hear it, "then I'm giving it back to the right person tonight. I hope you're watching." I turned away from the portrait and found my place. My assigned table, number 19, was just as my mother had promised, in the back, by the drafty terrace doors, a table populated by junior staffers and local press. I was meant to be invisible. I smiled. It was the perfect place to observe. For the next hour, I watched Mason work. He was magnificent, in a reptilian sort of way. He schmoozed, he glad-handed, he moved from table to table, his voice carrying over the din, painting himself as the philanthropic son keeping his father's legacy alive. The Daniel Rhodes Veterans Relief Fund isn't just a charity. I heard him tell a group of defense contractors, it's a promise that we, as a family and a corporation, will always put our servicemen first. I almost choked on my water. The appetizer plates were being cleared when I saw the exchange. A man I recognized from Noah Briggs's website, a senior associate at Legacy Intel, dressed in a waiter's jacket, moved discreetly to Mason's side. He handed him a stack of thick, professionally bound documents. They were ivory-colored cardstock, with a clear plastic cover. On the front, in elegant black script, were the words, "Kendall Rhodes, background brief." Mason took the stack, his smile triumphant. He didn't even thank the man. He just nodded, and the PI melted back into the shadows. Mason fanned the documents slightly, showing them to Ryan Thorne, the lawyer, who was sitting at his table. Ryan nodded, looking pleased. Mason then had waiters distribute a copy of the dossier to every guest at the head tables, the admirals, the senators, the major donors, and, of course, my mother. I watched Mason flip through his own copy. He skimmed the first 2 pages. From across the room, I could see his smirk widen. He had found what he was looking for. Noah had done exactly as I'd hoped. He was a master of narrative. The first 2 pages were a beautifully written summary of my troubled years. It included the college dropout, the unstable freelance period, the fact I had lived in a co-working space because I could not afford a residence. It was all the dirt Mason had paid for, presented as fact. He didn't read page 3. He was too arrogant. He assumed the entire 30-page document was just a long-form version of the same story. He closed the cover, satisfied, and laid the document by his plate. ready for the main event. After Admiral Hale was introduced and gave a brief, gracious speech, during which he never once looked at me, Mason was invited to the stage. This was his moment, the sponsor's address. He strode to the microphone, radiating confidence. He looked out over the sea of faces, his gaze landing on me in the back of the room for just a second. It was a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. "Thank you all," he began, his voice booming through the speakers. "It is an honor to be here, celebrating the legacy of my father, Captain Daniel Rhodes." He paused for applause, which was dutifully given. "Legacy," he continued, his voice taking on a somber, pitying tone. "It's a heavy word. It's about responsibility. It's about protecting the name your father built. And as a family, we have always tried to do that, even when it's been difficult." He looked at me again. This time, he held my gaze. "As many of you know, my family has always been worried about my sister, Kendall." A murmur went through the room. This was not the standard charity gala speech. "We love her dearly," Mason said, his voice dripping with fake sincerity. "But she has struggled to find her path. She has been adrift, living in a fantasy world, building an imaginary startup, while avoiding the real work of the world. We've tried to help. We've tried to give her a safe harbor." I sat perfectly still, my hands in my lap. I could feel the eyes of the entire room shifting to me, in the back, at the bad table. I was the spectacle. "But sometimes," Mason said, shaking his head sadly, "you can't help those who won't help themselves. And recently, my sister has begun making claims, delusions of grandeur. She has been claiming to have contracts with the Navy. She has been using our family name to lend credibility to a business that doesn't exist." This was it, the kill shot. "We were worried," Mason said, picking up the dossier from the podium. "So we did our due diligence. We hired a firm to get to the truth. You'll find a copy of their report on your tables. We felt it was our duty to be transparent." He opened the document, his fingers scanning for the lines he had rehearsed. "You can read for yourselves. The history of instability, the lack of a permanent address, the... His voice faltered. He had turned to page 3. He stopped reading. His smile froze, then twitched. His eyes, suddenly frantic, flew across the page. He flipped to page 4, then 5. The room was silent, watching him. "The documents seem to be," he stammered, his face losing its confident flush. "It seems..." Around the room, the other guests were getting curious. They had been listening to a juicy family drama, and now they picked up their own copies of the report. I heard the rustle of 30 pages turning at once. I watched my mother. She had been staring at me with a look of cold satisfaction. Now, she frowned, confused by Mason's hesitation, and opened her own copy. Mason was flipping pages frantically now, his face going from pale to a deep, blotchy red. He had reached the middle of the report. He had reached the harbor site analytics section. I knew those pages by heart. Page 12, the full, multi-million-dollar contract with the Port of Baltimore. Page 15, the side-by-side performance analysis, showing Harborsite's algorithm outperforming Rhodes Marine's manual system by 42%. Page 20, the letter of commendation from the Naval Supply Systems Command, praising our innovative and secure platform. Page 25, the full security audit from the DoD, giving Harborsite a superior rating. The whispers in the room started. They weren't whispers about me being a failure. They were whispers of confusion, then of interest. At the table next to mine, a young one-star admiral leaned over to his colleague, pointing at a page. "Jesus, Frank," he whispered, not realizing I could hear him. "Look at this. This is the risk assessment platform we've been trying to get funded for 3 years. She actually built it." Near the front, a portly defense contractor was frowning. "Wait a minute," he said to his table. "Mason told me her company was vaporware. This is a DoD security clearance." My mother had gone completely white. She was staring at the revenue charts, her mouth slightly open. Mason was trapped. He was on stage, under a spotlight, with 500 people reading a document that proved he was a liar. It seems, he tried to laugh, but the sound was a strangled cough. It seems the printing company has put these documents together, all out of order. A terrible mix-up. He tried to close the dossier, to shove it aside, but it was too late. The cat was out of the bag, and it was scratching his eyes out. He tried to recover. This is just a testament to what a little family support can do, even for the most creative of us. But no one was listening to him. They were reading. A young admiral, seated at a table near me, actually stood up. He walked over to my table, ignoring the breach of protocol. "Ms. Rhodes?" he asked. I stood up. "Admiral?" He tapped the document in his hand. "Are these numbers real? Your predictive algorithm on port congestion, is this data verified?" "It is," I said, my voice clear and carrying in the awkward silence. "It's been running live for the Port of Baltimore for 18 months. We've saved them an estimated $9 million in demurrage fees alone." The Admiral's eyes widened. "Good God," he muttered. He looked back toward the stage at Mason, his expression shifting from curiosity to open contempt. "Mr. Rhodes," he called out, "you've been proposing a $100 million manual system upgrade to us for 2 years. Why haven't you mentioned this?" Mason's face was a mask of sweat and panic. This is a separate side project, a passion project of my sister's." "It looks," the Admiral said, his voice cold, "like the future." The humiliation was complete. The weapon Mason had built to destroy me had detonated in his own hands. The room was buzzing, not with pity for me, but with questions about Mason's competence and honesty. He was ruined. His reputation as a savvy CEO was gone. He had just been exposed as a liar and a fool in front of his entire industry. And the real bomb hadn't even dropped yet. As Mason stood there, paralyzed, a new figure moved into the spotlight. Admiral Marcus Hale stepped forward from the side of the stage. He had been standing in the shadows, watching the entire exchange. He walked past Mason and stood at the center of the podium, though he didn't touch the microphone. He simply stood there, in his full-dress uniform, and looked out at the crowd. He was the guest of honor. The room fell silent again, waiting for him to speak, to save the evening from this agonizing awkwardness. Marcus didn't speak. He slowly, deliberately, raised his right hand and placed it on the podium. The spotlight hit the silver. It hit the deep blue of the lapis lazuli. The ring was massive, unmissable. A gasp went through the room. It started at the front tables. The old guard, the men who had served with my father. I heard one of them, a retired vice admiral, whisper, "My God, that's Daniel's ring." My mother saw it. Her hand flew to her pearls, and a small, strangled sound escaped her throat. Mason, in his panic, hadn't noticed. He was still trying to shuffle his papers, but the silence, a new, heavier silence, finally got through to him. He looked up. He saw the ring. He stopped breathing. All the color drained from his face, leaving a waxy, gray sheen. He stared at the ring on Marcus's hand, his eyes wide with a terror that was bone deep. He looked from the ring to Marcus's face, then to me in the back of the room. The humiliation was over. The trial had just begun. The entire room could feel it. The air was electric, brittle, like the moment before a lightning strike. The disaster they had just witnessed, Mason's failed smear campaign, was just the opening act. The real story was on the Admiral's hand, and everyone in the room knew that the man who had just been exposed as a liar was standing next to a ghost. The room was so quiet, you could hear the hum of the ventilation system. Mason stood frozen at the podium, a man whose entire reality had just fractured. He looked at the ring on Admiral Hale's hand as if it were a poisonous snake coiled ready to strike. Admiral Hale did not look at Mason. He looked out at the audience, his expression grave. He reached out and adjusted the microphone stand, claiming the stage not with anger, but with the terrifying authority of a man who has sent fleets to war. "I beg your indulgence," the Admiral said, his voice deep and steady. "I know the program calls for dinner service, but there is a matter of history that must be corrected before we break bread." He raised his right hand higher, turning it so the spotlight caught the flat, blue face of the stone. "Many of you in the front rows recognize this ring," he said. "It belonged to Captain Daniel Rhodes. It was his compass, his badge of honor. 10 years ago. You were told it was buried with him. You were told he took it to his grave because he wanted to rest with his legacy." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw old friends of my father leaning forward, squinting, their faces pale. "That was a lie," Marcus said. "The ring was not in the coffin. It was in my safe." He lowered his hand and looked directly at Mason, who was now trembling visibly. 2 weeks before his death, Daniel came to me. He was a man under siege in his own home. He told me that he feared his wife and his son were conspiring to force him to alter his estate plan. He told me they wanted to consolidate power, to cut out his daughter, and to turn Rhodes Marine into a machine for profit rather than service. Elaine stood up at table 1. "Marcus!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "How dare you? This is a private family matter. You are drunk." "Sit down." "Elaine," Marcus said. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. The command in his voice was absolute. 2 security guards stepped closer to her table, not touching her, but making it clear she was not to move. She sank back into her chair, her face a mask of shock. "Daniel gave me this ring," Marcus continued. "As a token, he gave me a handwritten will, drafted in his own hand, witnessed by a jagged line of text that stated his true intentions. He instructed me to hold these items in trust. He said that if his daughter, Kendall, could prove she possessed the strength and the integrity to build her own life without his money, I was to return the ring to her, and with the ring, the company." Mason lunged for the microphone. "You are lying. He is senile. He is making this up to steal the company." Marcus ignored him. He clicked a small remote in his hand, the massive projection screen behind the stage, which had been displaying the gala logo, flickered and changed. A high-resolution scan of a document appeared. It was yellowed, handwritten on legal paper. On the left side of the screen was the official will that had been probated 10 years ago. On the right was the document Marcus had held. Highlighted in red were the differences. The official will gave Mason 90% of the voting shares. The handwritten will split the company 50-50, with a controlling interest in a blind trust for me. The room gasped. It was undeniable. The handwriting was identical. The intent was clear. "But that is not all," Marcus said. "While the theft of an inheritance is a civil matter, the theft of honor is something else entirely." He clicked the remote again. The screen changed. Now, it showed the complex web of financial transactions that Eli and I had mapped out. It showed the flow of money from the Daniel Rhodes Veterans Relief Fund into the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, and then back into Mason's personal holding companies. "For the last 5 years," Marcus said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage, "Mason Rhodes has been using his father's name to solicit donations from you, the Navy, the defense industry, the people in this room. He has claimed these funds were for wounded veterans. Instead, he has used 40% of every dollar to cover the operating losses of Rhodes Marine and to fund his own lifestyle." The silence in the room broke. It shattered. People stood up. Chairs scraped violently against the floor. I heard the word criminal muttered. I heard disgrace. I saw a 3-star Admiral throw his napkin onto the table in disgust. Mason looked around, his eyes wild. He turned to Ryan Thorne, the family lawyer. "Ryan, do something. Sue him. Get him off the stage." Ryan Thorne did not move. He was staring at his phone, or pretending to. He slowly pushed his chair back, putting physical distance between himself and Mason. He knew the ship was going down, and he was already swimming for the lifeboats. "That is a lie!" Mason screamed, his voice high and thin. "That data is fake. It is my sister. She is a hacker. She made it up." At that moment, The side doors of the ballroom opened. 2 men in dark suits walked in. They didn't run. They walked with the purposeful, heavy stride of federal authority. They moved straight to the stage. One of them flashed a badge that caught the light. "Mason Rhodes?" the agent said, his voice carrying clearly over the murmuring crowd. "I am Special Agent Miller with the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. We are executing a federal warrant for the seizure of electronic records and the freezing of assets related to Rhodes Marine Logistics and the Veterans Relief Fund." Mason backed away, bumping into the podium. "You can't do this here. This is a gala. My mother?" "Your mother is also named in the warrant as a person of interest regarding the conspiracy to commit fraud," the agent said calmly. Elaine let out a wail that sounded less like grief and more like a dying animal. She looked around for support, for her friends, for the senator's wife she had been talking to earlier, but there was no one. The space around her table had cleared as if she were radioactive. The social currency she had hoarded for 40 years had evaporated in 40 seconds. The agent gestured to the door. "We need you to come with us. Mr. Rhodes, now. We can do this quietly, or we can do it with cuffs. It is your choice." Mason looked at the crowd. He looked for a friendly face. He looked for someone to save him. But all he saw was a sea of uniforms, rigid with judgment. He had stolen from their own. There was no forgiveness in that room. Shoulders sagging, the golden boy of Brunswick finally broke. He nodded, a jerky, puppet-like motion, and allowed the agents to flank him. As they escorted him off the stage and through the side exit, the room was deadly silent. He didn't look back. When the doors closed behind him, the tension in the room shifted. It wasn't over. Admiral Hale stepped down from the podium. He didn't go back to his seat. He walked through the center of the room, the crowd parting for him like the Red Sea. He walked straight toward table 19. I stood up. My legs felt steady, though my heart was beating so hard I thought it might bruise my ribs. Marcus stopped in front of me. He looked tired, but his eyes were bright. He took my right hand in his. He didn't say a word to the crowd. He didn't have to. He slid the silver ring off his own finger. It was warm from his skin. He placed it into my palm and closed my fingers over it. "He told me to give this to the one who built their own ship," Marcus said, loud enough for the tables nearby to hear. "Welcome to the fleet, Kendall." He stepped back and saluted me, a sharp, crisp hand to the brow. For a second, there was silence. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the room, a slow clap started. It was my Aunt Marlene, standing up, tears streaming down her face. Then a retired captain stood up. Then the young admiral who had asked about my software. The applause grew. It wasn't the polite applause of a gala. It was a thunderous, rolling sound. It was the sound of respect. They weren't clapping for the drama. They were clapping because the truth had walked into the room and won. I looked at the ring in my hand. I slipped it onto my middle finger. It was heavy. It felt like an anchor, but in a good way. It felt like holding my father's hand one last time. As the applause began to fade, and the guests started to talk excitedly amongst themselves, a man in a gray suit approached me. He had the lanyard of a senior Department of Defense procurement officer. "Ms. Rhodes," he said, extending his hand. "I am sorry about the circumstances, but I saw the dossier, and I heard what Admiral Hale said. The Navy has a supply chain crisis, and it looks like Rhodes Marine is going to be out of commission for a long time. We need stability. We need that algorithm." I shook his hand. My grip was firm. "We can discuss the terms on Monday," I said. "Harborside is ready to serve." He nodded, impressed. "I will call your office." I turned away from the crowd. I needed a moment. I walked to the back of the room, to the large portrait of Captain Daniel Rhodes. The artist had painted him looking stern, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The room behind me was chaotic. Waiters clearing plates, people gossiping, my mother weeping in the corner as her lawyer tried to explain that her assets were frozen. But in front of the painting, it was quiet. I raised my hand, pressing the cool stone of the ring against the glass, right over his painted hand. Before tonight, I thought revenge was about burning things down. I thought it was about making them hurt the way I hurt. But standing there, I realized it wasn't about them at all. It was about the restoration of something that had been broken. Before, I was the daughter they hid. Now, I was the one holding the compass. "Dad," I whispered, my voice thick with the tears I finally allowed myself to feel. I do not need them to admit they were wrong. I do not need their apology. The truth didn't just come out. It picked a side, and it picked us. I turned back to face the room, the ring flashing under the lights, ready to build something new on the ashes of the old. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you enjoyed seeing justice finally served, please let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear your thoughts on Kendall's journey. Don't forget to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like the video, and hit that hype button so we can share more stories like this with everyone.